Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. Have you ever seen lightning strike the same place twice? They say it's impossible, but I know better. I've seen it hit the same spot 3 times, splitting the sky over Mono Lake while something impossible walked on water. The morning began like any other fishing trip. The eastern Sierra Nevada mountains loomed over me as I launched my small boat from Navy Beach. My name is Jack Harmon, and after 20 years fishing these waters, I thought I knew Mono Lake better than most. The alkaline waters stretched before me, those strange tufa towers jutting from the surface like ancient sentinels standing watch over the lake's secrets. My fishing buddy Miguel had canceled at the last minute, something about his daughter's soccer game. So it was just me, alone on the water, which never bothered me before. I preferred solitude, especially after the divorce last year. The lake had become my therapy, my escape. The air felt different that day. Heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. The clouds gathering over the mountains should have been my first warning, but I ignored them. Weather forecasts had predicted clear skies, and I'd grown complacent with the lake's patterns. I motored out to my favorite spot about a mile from shore, where the water deepened and the trout ran thick. The engine's rumble was the only sound disturbing the morning stillness. No birds called. No insects buzzed. Just silence and the engine's consistent purr. Then it stopped, not gradually but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. I pulled the starter cord once, twice, 3 times. Nothing, just a hollow clicking sound. Perfect, I muttered, digging through my tackle box for tools. The silence pressed against my ears, unnatural and thick. That's when I noticed the wind had died too. The surface of the lake turned mirror smooth, reflecting the darkening sky with perfect clarity. Something moved in the water's reflection. A shadow that didn't belong there. I looked up, scanning the sky, but saw nothing that could have cast it. When I looked back at the water, the reflection was normal again. My hand trembled slightly as I checked the engine. The spark plug looked fine, the fuel line intact. Nothing obvious was wrong, yet the engine refused to start. I was stranded, but that wasn't unusual for experienced fishermen. I had paddles, food, water. I'd be fine. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the lake, and I glanced at the mountains. Dark clouds boiled up from behind them, advancing with unnatural speed. The weather report had been wrong. Very wrong. The hair on my arm stood up, and a metallic taste filled my mouth. Even before I heard the crackle, I knew what was coming. The first lightning bolt struck the water half a mile away, its reflection creating a perfect circle of light above and below the lake's surface. That's when I saw it, a figure standing on the water near the lightning strike. Just for a moment, silhouetted against the sudden brightness. A human shape perfectly still, where no human could possibly stand. I blinked and it was gone. Must be a tufa tower, I muttered, trying to convince myself. Or a trick of the light, but I knew better. There was no tufa tower there, and the figure had been too distinct, too human-like, too impossible. The sky darkened further, the clouds swallowing the sun. The temperature dropped so quickly I could see my breath. This was no ordinary storm. In all my years on Mono Lake, I'd never seen weather change so rapidly. Another flash of lightning, closer this time. The crack of thunder followed almost immediately, the sound vibrating through my chest. And there it was again, the figure standing motionless on the water's surface, closer now. Close enough that I could see it was definitely human-shaped, though still too distant to make out features. "Hey," I shouted before I could stop myself. "Who's there?" my voice echoed across the water, swallowed by another rumble of thunder. The figure didn't move or respond, just stood there impossibly on the surface of the lake. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but it was dead. Not low battery, completely dead. The screen remained black no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The first raindrops hit my face, fat and cold. Within seconds, the gentle patter became a roaring downpour, filling my boat faster than the small pump could handle. The waves rose, tossing my little craft like a toy. I grabbed the paddles, trying to turn the boat toward shore, but the wind had picked up with ferocious intensity, pushing me farther out into the lake. Toward the figure. Lightning struck again, and this time I counted. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, crack. Less than a mile away. And the figure was still there, unmoved by the churning waters around it. Standing perfectly still while I fought against the wave and wind. "What do you want?" I screamed, but my words were lost in the howling gale. The boat lurched violently as a wave crashed over the side. Water sloshed around my ankles, weighing down the craft. I belayed frantically with a plastic container, but it was useless against the relentless downpour. Another flash of lightning, directly overhead this time. The world turned white, then black. The thunder was instantaneous, so loud it was physical, hammering against my body. I covered my ears, dropping to my knees in the half-flooded boat. When I looked up, the figure was gone. But something else had taken its place. The water where it had stood was different, churning in a perfect circle, like a whirlpool forming in the middle of the storm. The surface began to glow with an eerie blue light that seemed to come from deep beneath the lake. I couldn't look away. The glow pulsed, brightened, and then impossibly rose from the water. A column of blue light stretching toward the storming sky. And within that light, shadows moved. Human-shaped shadows, dancing or perhaps struggling, their forms distorted and stretched. The boat spun, caught in the storm's fury, and I lost sight of the light. When I managed to turn around again, the lake's surface was normal, just angry waves and pelting rain. But I felt watched, observed, haunted. The storm raged on, lightning flashing across the sky in continuous strokes. My boat was taking on water faster than I could bail. I was going to sink, and shore was still so far away. That's when I heard it, a whisper, somehow audible over the storm's roar. My name. Someone or something was calling my name. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jack, Jack. Come closer, I froze, the bailing container slipping from my numb fingers. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was like listening to multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. "Who's there?" I shouted, spinning in circles, searching for the source. Lightning struck again, and in its brief illumination, I saw them. Not one figure, but dozens, standing in a perfect circle around my boat. Each one motionless on the water's surface, each one watching me with featureless faces. As darkness fell again, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Jack, you've come at last. We've been waiting for you." The storm intensified, as if responding to the voices. Waves crashed over my boat's sides, and I knew I was going to die here, surrounded by impossible figures standing on water, whispering my name. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rain stopped. The wind died. The clouds parted, revealing a sky full of stars. The lake went calm, the surface smooth as glass once more. I was alone again. No figures on the water. No whispering voices. Just me in my half-sunken boat, soaked to the bone and shivering in the sudden silence. Had I imagined it all? A hallucination brought on by fear and exposure. I began to paddle toward shore, my arms trembling with exhaustion and cold. I'd almost convinced myself it had been a strange but natural storm, my mind playing tricks until I saw the Tufa Tower. There, where no tower had been before, stood a new formation. Human-shaped arms outstretched, face turned toward the sky. And as I watched, it slowly turned its head to look at me. I paddled frantically, my arms burning with effort as I tried to put distance between myself and that thing, the human-shaped Tufa Tower. The formation that had moved. That had looked at me. "It's not possible," I whispered to myself over and over. A mantra to keep panic at bay. Tufa doesn't form that quickly. It doesn't move. It doesn't look, but I knew what I'd seen. The night was eerily calm now. The storm vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Stars reflected perfectly in the glassy surface of Mono Lake, making it impossible to tell where water ended and sky began. It was beautiful. Terrifying. I'd lost my bearings in the chaos, but I could make out the dark line of the shore to my west. I aimed for it, methodically dipping and pulling the paddle through the water, trying to ignore the way my hands shook. Something splashed behind me. I whipped around, nearly capsizing the already waterlogged boat. Nothing there. Just circles spreading across the previously calm surface, as if something had dipped a finger into the lake. Circles that were spreading toward me. I redoubled my efforts, muscles screaming in protest. The shore seemed no closer, no matter how hard I paddled. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging in the cold night air. Another splash. Closer this time. More circles rippling outward. I forced myself not to look. Whatever was following me, I didn't want to see it. Didn't want to know what made those perfectly circular ripples in water that should have been still. The boat suddenly jerked to a stop, as if I'd hit something solid. But there was nothing, just open water all around me. I leaned over the side, peering into the depths. Bad mistake. A face stared back at me from beneath the surface. Not a reflection, a face in the water. Pale, eyes wide open, mouth moving as if trying to speak. I recoiled, scrambling backward until I hit the other side of the small boat. The face rose slowly, breaking the surface without creating a ripple. A man's face, middle-aged, weathered by sun and wind. A face I recognized with sickening clarity. Miguel, my fishing buddy who'd canceled this morning. "You're not real," I croaked, my throat dry with fear. "You're at home. With your family." The face, Miguel's face, smiled, but there was something wrong with the expression. "Too wide. Too many teeth." "Jack," it said in that same multi-layered voice I'd heard during the storm. "Why did you come alone? You know it's not safe to fish alone. What are you?" I demanded, clutching the paddle like a weapon. "What do you want?" The thing wearing Miguel's face tilted its head, water streaming from hair that should have been plastered to its scalp, but somehow moved as if underwater. "We want company," it said simply. "It's lonely beneath the lake." More ripples appeared around my boat, more faces breaking the surface. Dozens of them. Some I recognized, other fishermen from the area, a park ranger who'd gone missing last year, tourists who'd visited the lake. And one face I knew better than any other. My ex-wife, Elaine. Her eyes, once warm brown, now glowed with that same eerie blue light I'd seen during the storm. "No," I whispered. "You're not her. She's in Colorado." "She left me," the thing wearing Elaine's face laughed, a sound like water rushing over stones. "Everyone leaves eventually, Jack. But the lake remains." The lake remembers. My boat began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. I realized with horror that we were in the center of a forming whirlpool. The faces circled around me, watching with those glowing blue eyes as my boat spun. "The lightning never strikes the same place twice," the Miguel thing said. "Except when it does," the Lane thing finished. As if on cue, the sky, which had been clear moments before, split open with a jagged bolt of lightning. It struck the water exactly where it had before, creating that same column of blue light. Only this time I was much closer. Close enough to see what moved within that light. Bodies. Human bodies floating in a perfect column from the lake bed to the sky. Suspended in that impossible blue glow, their limbs moving languidly as if drifting in gentle currents. Some were recent, their clothes still recognizable, their skin unmarked by decay. Others were older, reduced to skeletons, dressed in the tattered remains of clothing decades out of date. And at the very center of the column, a single figure stood upright. The same figure I'd seen standing on the water during the storm. A man tall and thin, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned diving suit. But where his head should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of blue light. "Who is that?" I asked, unable to stop myself. The faces around my boat spoke in unison, their voices merging into a sound like waves crashing against rocks. "The keeper. The one who called the lightning. The one who keeps us here." "Why?" I asked, unable to look away from the horrifying spectacle. "Because we are needed," they replied. "Because the lake hungers." The whirlpool spun faster, my boat tilting dangerously as it was drawn toward the center, toward that column of light and the headless figure within it. "I had to get out. I had to escape." In desperation, I plunged my paddle into the water, trying to break free of the whirlpool's pull. The paddle hit something solid beneath the surface and snapped in two. Not something. Someone. A hand had grabbed the paddle, pale fingers wrapped around the wood with impossible strength. The hand pulled, trying to drag me overboard. I let go of the broken paddle and scrambled to the center of the boat, which was now taking on water at an alarming rate. The whirlpool's edge was only feet away, the blue light casting everything in an otherworldly glow. "It's your turn, Jack," the voices said, no longer coming from the faces in the water, but from inside my head. "Your turn to join us." To become part of the lake, the boat tilted further, water pouring over the sides. I was going in. There was no way to stop it. In that moment of certainty, of knowing I was about to die, a strange calm washed over me. I looked up at the night sky, at the stars wheeling overhead, and said goodbye to the world. The boat flipped. I plunged into the icy water, the cold shocking me back to full awareness. I kicked frantically, trying to reach the surface, but something caught my ankle. Pulled me down. I looked down and saw them, dozens of pale arms reaching up from the depths, hands grasping at my legs, my clothes, my arms. Pulling me deeper. My lungs burned. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I was drowning, and some detached part of my mind wondered if this was how all the others had felt. All those faces in the water. Just as consciousness began to fade, something changed. The blue light intensified, becoming almost blinding even through the water. The hands holding me loosened, then withdrew. I kicked desperately, my vision tunneling, my chest on fire. Just as the darkness was about to claim me, my head broke the surface. There, sweet, precious air. I gasped, coughed, gasped again. Tread water weakly, too exhausted to do more than keep my face above the surface. The whirlpool was gone. The column of light was gone. The lake was calm once more, reflecting the stars. As if nothing had happened. But something had changed. When I looked down at my hands, they seemed different, almost translucent in the moonlight, with a faint blue glow emanating from beneath the skin. And I could feel them now. All of them, the others in the lake. Their presence, their awareness, their hunger. Not as separate entities, but as extensions of myself. Of the lake. With a clarity that should have terrified me but somehow didn't, I realized what had happened. Why the hands had released me. Why the blue light had intensified. The keeper had chosen me. I began to swim toward shore, my movements eerily efficient, my body no longer feeling the cold or fatigue. As I swam, I became aware of others swimming alongside me beneath the surface. My new companions. My new family. When I reached the shallows, I stood up and walked onto the beach. Water streamed from my clothes, but I barely noticed. I was focused on the figure waiting for me at the water's edge. The headless diver stood motionless, that swirling vortex of blue light where his head should have been casting eerie shadows across the sand. He extended a gloved hand toward me, beckoning. I should have been terrified, should have run, but something had changed inside me when I'd nearly drowned. Some fundamental shift in my perception. I heard his voice in my mind, clear as if spoken aloud. The lake has chosen you, Jack. As it chose me long ago. Who are you? I asked, my own voice sounding distant and strange to my ears. I was the first, the figure replied. The first to see what dwells beneath Mana Lake. The first to understand its hunger. Images flashed through my mind, a man in an old-fashioned diving suit, exploring the lake sometime in the early 20th century. Discovering something in the depths. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting. "What is it?" I whispered. "What's down there?" The headless diver's shoulders moved in what might have been a shrug. "Does it matter? It's been here longer than humans have walked the earth. It will remain long after we're gone. And it needs caretakers like you, like us," he corrected. "The lake touches many but chooses few. Those it chooses become its voice, its hands. Its keepers and the others," I asked, thinking of the faces in the water. "Of Miguel and Elaine. The ones in the lake, they fight it," the diver said simply. "Their fear, their confusion, their despair. The entity beneath the lake feeds on emotion as much as flesh." I should have been horrified, but that new coldness inside me, that piece of the lake that had somehow become part of me, accepted this as natural. "As right. What do I do now?" I asked. "You continue your life," the diver said. "You return to your home, to your job. But you serve the lake now. You will bring it what it needs, people," I said flatly. "You want me to bring people to the lake," the vortex where his head should have been swirled faster, almost eagerly. "Only those who won't be missed," he assured me. "The lonely, the lost, the forgotten. The lake is not greedy. 1 or 2 a year will suffice." A part of me, the part that was still human, still Jack Harmon, recoiled at the suggestion. But that part was growing smaller, more distant with each passing moment. "And if I refuse?" I asked, already knowing the answer. The diver's gloved hand gestured toward the lake. "Then you join the others. The lake gives a choice, but only one." I looked out over the dark water, at the stars reflected in its surface. At the faces watching from just beneath the water, dozens of them, their eyes glowing blue in the darkness. "I understand," I said, and I did. "Fully and completely." The diver nodded, the vortex of light spinning one last time before winking out. Where he had stood was now only a peculiarly shaped tufa tower, its form vaguely reminiscent of a man in a diving suit. I turned and walked away from the lake, toward the parking lot where my truck waited. My clothes were already drying, despite having been completely soaked just minutes before. The night was cold, but I felt no chill. As I reached my truck, I glanced back at the lake one last time. The surface was calm, innocent. No sign of the horrors I'd witnessed. No hint of what lurked beneath. But I knew, and I would remember. I drove home in silence, not bothering with the radio. My mind was too full of new awareness, new understanding. I could feel the lake's presence even miles away, a constant pressure at the back of my thoughts. When I arrived at my small house on the outskirts of Lee Vining, I went through the motions of normal life. Showered, changed into dry clothes, made a cup of coffee I didn't drink. Then I sat at my kitchen table and contemplated what I'd become. The lake had changed me. I could feel it in my body, a subtle blue glow beneath my skin that was only visible in complete darkness. I could feel it in my mind, new thoughts, new instincts, new hungers. I should have been terrified. Should have been planning how to fight this, how to get help. But those impulses seemed distant, academic. The lake's will was stronger. My phone rang, startling me from my reverie. Miguel's name flashed on the screen. I answered, my voice surprisingly steady. "Hey, Jack. Thank God you're okay." Miguel's voice was frantic. "There was this crazy storm over the lake today. I saw it from town. Been trying to call you for hours. Sorry," I said. "Phone died. I'm fine, you sure? You sound different." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Just tired. It was a long day, I bet. Listen, I feel bad about canceling. How about we go fishing tomorrow? Weather's supposed to be perfect." I felt a surge of something cold and alien inside me. The lake responding to the opportunity. "Sure," I said. "That sounds great, awesome. I'll bring beer. Meet at the usual spot." 7 too early, 7 is perfect," I said, already imagining Miguel's face joining the others beneath the water's surface. "I can't wait." After we hung up, I sat in the dark, watching the faint blue glow pulsing beneath my skin. Listening to the whispers in my mind, the voices of all those who had become one with the lake. Soon Miguel would join them. And then perhaps others. The lake had chosen me as its keeper, and I would not disappoint. Outside my window, lightning flashed across the clear night sky. Impossible lightning with no storm clouds in sight. I smiled. The lake was pleased. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep. My mind buzzed with new awareness, new sensations. I could feel the lake even from miles away, a constant presence, a pull like gravity. And I could feel the others, those who had become one with the water. Their consciousness wasn't gone as I'd first thought. It was redistributed, merged, a collective awareness that now included a piece of me. By morning, the blue glow beneath my skin had faded to invisibility, but I could still feel the change. The subtle wrongness. The lake's cold touch on my thoughts. I packed my fishing gear methodically, adding extra items I hadn't planned, a heavy wrench, a length of rope, a tarp. The human part of me watched with detached horror as my hands moved of their own accord, preparing to take Miguel. "This isn't me," I whispered to my empty house. I wouldn't do this, but I knew I would. The lake's will was stronger than mine. I drove to our meeting spot, arriving early. The rising sun painted Monot Lake in shades of pink and gold, making it look innocent. Beautiful, harmless. I knew better now. Miguel arrived right on time, his truck kicking up dust as it pulled into the small parking area. He grinned as he got out, holding up a six-pack of beer. "Morning, sunshine. Ready to catch some fish?" I smiled back, the expression feeling stiff and unnatural on my face. Always, we loaded our gear into my boat, which I'd somehow recovered from the lake during the night. Another memory I couldn't quite access, but I knew had happened. The boat showed no signs of the previous night's damage, no cracks, no water damage, not even a scratch. Miguel didn't seem to notice anything strange. He chattered happily as we pushed off from shore, talking about his daughter's soccer game, his wife's new job, the ordinary details of a life I now viewed through a veil of detachment. You okay, man? He asked eventually. You're quieter than usual, I nodded, focusing on steering the boat. Just didn't sleep well. That storm must have been something. I've never seen lightning like that. Weather report didn't mention anything about it. No, I agreed. It wasn't in the forecast. We reached the center of the lake and I cut the engine. The boat drifted to a stop, rocking gently on the calm water. Perfect fishing conditions. Miguel started setting up his rod, still talking. I watched him, my hand drifting toward the wrench I'd stowed under my seat. It would be so lazy. One quick blow to the back of the head. He'd never see it coming. The lake would welcome him as it had welcomed so many others. My fingers closed around the wrench's handle. Hey, Jack, Miguel said suddenly, turning to look at me. Have you ever noticed how weird the Tufa Towers look from this angle? Almost like people standing in the water. I froze, the wrench half raised behind my back. What? Miguel pointed across the lake. Those formations. They look like people, don't they? Like they're watching us. I followed his gesture and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The Tufa Towers did look like people because they were. The headless diver and others like him. Keepers of the lake from years, decades, centuries past. All standing motionless, watching us. Watching me, expecting me to do what they had done. To fade the lake. To bring it what it needed. Miguel was still talking, oblivious to my inner turmoil. My grandfather used to tell stories about this lake. Said it was sacred to the native people. That they believed spirits lived in the water. What kind of spirits? I asked, my voice hoarse. Miguel shrugged. Hungry ones, according to him. Grandpa said people would go missing sometimes. Fishermen, hikers, tourists. The locals blamed it on the lake's spirits. My hand tightened on the wrench. The lake's pressure intensified in my mind, a demand, a need. Take him. Feed us. Join us fully. Your grandfather was right, I said quietly. Miguel laughed. Yeah, right. Next you'll tell me you've seen the lake monster. I didn't respond. Just stared out at the water, at the Tufa Towers that were not towers, at the perfectly still surface that concealed so much horror. Jack, Miguel's voice had changed, concern replacing amusement. Hey man, you're scaring me a little. You look different. I turned to him, and from the way he recoiled, I knew what he was seeing. The blue glow had returned, visible even in daylight. I could feel it pulsing beneath my skin, behind my eyes. Oh my God, Miguel whispered. What happened to you, the lake? I said simply. It chose me. Miguel's hand moved slowly toward his tackle box, where I knew he kept a hunting knife. Jack, you need help. You're not well. I raised the wrench, no longer trying to hide it. I'm sorry, Miguel. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do, he said, eyes fixed on the wrench. We always have a choice, and something in those words, in the simple human truth of them, broke through the lake's hold on my mind. Just for a moment, did I have a choice? The headless diver had said so. Join us or serve us. But was there a third option? Could I fight this? The moment of clarity passed as quickly as it had come, the lake's will reasserting itself. The wrench felt heavy in my hand. Ready. "Get down," Miguel suddenly shouted, lunging toward me. I thought he was attacking, raised the wrench to defend myself. But he wasn't coming for me. He was pointing at something behind me, his face a mask of terror. I turned and saw it, a column of water rising from the lake's surface. A waterspout, but unnaturally straight, unnaturally still. And within it, those same bodies I'd seen in the lightning column. The same blue glow. The lake was making its presence known, showing itself to Miguel. "What the hell is that?" he gasped. I should have been shocked that he could see it, but somehow I wasn't. The lake wanted him to see. Wanted him to know fear before he joined the others. "The true face of Mono Lake," I said, my voice not entirely my own. "What dwells beneath the surface?" The waterspout moved closer to our boat, the bodies within it turning slowly, their faces, so many faces, all turned toward us. Toward Miguel. He scrambled backward, nearly falling overboard in his panic. "We need to get out of here," I shook my head. "There's nowhere to go. The lake has chosen you." "No," Miguel said, reaching for the engine's starter cord. "No way. This isn't happening." The engine roared to life on the first pull, but before Miguel could put the boat in gear, the water around us began to churn. The same whirlpool from the night before was forming, with our boat at its center. "Jack, help me," Miguel pleaded, trying to steer the boat out of the whirlpool's pull. I stood motionless, the wrench still in my hand. The lake's will battled with my own. "Take him. Save him. Feed us. Help him." Miguel abandoned the motor and grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Jack, wake up. This isn't you." His words broke through again, stronger this time. "A crack in the lake's control. He was right. This wasn't me. I wouldn't sacrifice my friend to a hungry entity lurking beneath a lake. I wouldn't become a monster." "Miguel," I said, fighting to make my voice my own. "You need to go. Now, not without you," he insisted. The whirlpool spun faster, the boat tilting dangerously. The waterspout loomed over us, those bodies inside it reaching out with pale, waterlogged hands. I made my decision. Not the lake's choice, but mine. "I'm sorry," I said, and swung the wrench, not at Miguel, but at the boat's hull. The fiberglass cracked under the impact. "What are you doing?" Miguel cried. "Saving you," I said, and hit the hull again. And again. Water began to pour in through the cracks. "You're sinking us," Miguel shouted. "No," I corrected him. "I'm sinking me." With one final blow, the hull split open. Water rushed in, and the boat began to go down. "Swim," I ordered Miguel, pushing him toward the edge of the whirlpool. "Swim and don't look back, Jack, go," I roared, and something of the lake's power must have been in my voice, because Miguel obeyed instantly, diving into the water and swimming with powerful strokes toward the shore. I watched him go, fighting against the lake's command to stop him, to bring him back. The boat was sinking quickly now, the whirlpool helping to pull it down. As the water closed over my head, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had made my choice. Not the lake's choice, but my own. The pale hands reached for me, pulling me down into the darkness. The faces surrounded me, all those the lake had taken over the years. All those who had become part of its hunger. I would join them now, but on my terms. As consciousness faded, I heard the lake's voice, not in my mind this time, but all around me. In the water itself. You chose wrong, it said, its tone almost sad. No, I thought back. I chose right, and then darkness took me. I didn't expect to wake up. Didn't expect to ever open my eyes again. But I did. I was lying on the shore of Mono Lake, soaking wet and freezing cold. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. I had been in the lake all day, yet somehow I was alive. I sat up slowly, my body aching as if I'd been beaten. In a way, I supposed I had been. The lake stretched before me, innocent and calm in the fading light. No sign of whirlpools or waterspouts or bodies floating in columns of light. Just water and tufa towers and the calls of birds. But I knew better. I could still feel the lake inside me, fainter now but present. A cold spot in my mind that would never fully warm. I staggered to my feet and found I wasn't alone on the shore. The headless diver stood nearby, that vortex where his head should have been spinning slowly. You chose wrong, he said again. I stood my ground, shivering but defiant. No, I chose to remain human. The headless diver's vortex spun faster, a visible manifestation of agitation. You do not understand what you've done. The lake does not release what it claims. Then why am I here? I challenged, gesturing to the shore where I stood. Why am I alive? The diver took a step closer, water streaming from his ancient suit. You are not released. You are reassigned. A cold dread settled in my stomach, worse than the chill of my wet clothes. What does that mean? The lake has existed for millennia. It has known many keepers. Some serve willingly. Others in the vortex pulsed with blue light. Others must be compelled. I backed away, but my legs felt leaden, unwilling to carry me far from the water's edge. I won't do it. I won't bring people to the lake. You already have, the diver said softly. Horror washed over me as I realized what he meant. Miguel, did I, your friend, lives? This time, the diver's gloved hand gestured toward the road, where I could see the distant taillights of Miguel's truck disappearing around a bend. But he has seen the lake's true nature. He will return. They always do, I'll warn him, I said quickly. I'll tell everyone to stay away. The headless figure seemed to sigh, the sound like water rushing through pipes. No one will believe you. They never do. And the more you try to warn them, the more curious they become. The more drawn to the lake's mysteries. I knew he was right. Who would believe my story? Even with the lingering cold spot in my mind, part of me was already questioning whether it had all really happened. What happens now? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Now you go home. You live your life. But the lake remains with you. The diver turned toward the water. And when it calls, you will answer. And if I resist, the diver looked back at me, the vortex spinning hypnotically. The lake can be patient. It has existed since before humans walked these shores. It will exist long after we are gone. But it cannot be denied forever. With those words, he walked back into the water, each step deliberate until the lake swallowed him completely. I stood alone on the shore, watching the last light fade from the sky. The stars appeared, reflected perfectly in Mono Lake's still surface. A perfect mirror image. A perfect disguise for what lurked beneath. I turned and walked to my truck, which had somehow appeared in the parking lot despite having been at the bottom of the lake. Another mystery I couldn't explain. As I drove home, I told myself I would be strong. I would resist the lake's call. I would never bring it what it hungered for. But in the rearview mirror, my eyes reflected a faint blue glow. And in the back of my mind, I could hear the whispers of those who dwelled beneath the surface. Waiting, patient, eternal. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and drove faster, knowing I could never outrun what was now part of me. The lake had claimed me, marked me, changed me. And sooner or later it would call me home. 3 months have passed since that day at Mono Lake. I've tried to live normally. I go to work at the sporting goods store. I eat, I sleep, I avoid the lake. But its presence never leaves me. That cold spot in my mind grows sometimes, usually at night when I'm alone with my thoughts. The whispers get louder. The blue glow beneath my skin pulses with my heartbeat. Miguel hasn't spoken to me since that day. He avoids me in town, crosses the street when he sees me coming. I don't blame him. But last week I saw him driving toward the lake, his fishing gear in the back of his truck. The lake was calling him just as the diver had promised. I followed at a distance, parking where he couldn't see me. I watched him stand at the shore, staring out at the water for nearly an hour before finally turning back. Well, he's fighting it, but I know he'll return. And next time he might go out on the water. I've decided I can't let that happen. Not to Miguel. Not to anyone. Tonight I packed a bag with gasoline cans. If I can't fight what the lake has made me, then I'll destroy what I've become. The lake's call is strong now, a physical pull I can barely resist. But I drive away from it toward the mountains, toward isolation. I don't know if fire will free me from the lake's hold. I don't know if anything can. But I have to try. Because sometimes the lightning does strike the same place twice. And the third time it brings something hungry to the surface. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Have you ever felt like you're being watched while alone in the mountains? The morning light filtered through the pine trees as I adjusted my goggles at the summit of Phantom Peak. Below me stretched the pristine snow of Devil's Descent, the most challenging run at Silver Pine Resort. I'd arrived early to catch first tracks, or so I thought. The chairlifts wouldn't start running for another 30 minutes, yet somehow there were already faint marks on the otherwise untouched powder. Not ski tracks. Something else. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 6:15. The mountain patrol wouldn't have come through yet. I'd bribed the overnight groomer operator, my old buddy Marcus, to drop me at the summit before his shift ended. I was supposed to be alone up here. The air felt unnaturally still. Usually mountain mornings greeted you with brisk winds and the distant sounds of nature awakening. But today, nothing. Not even the whisper of pine needles rustling. Just silence, a suffocating, watching silence. I tucked my phone away and took a deep breath. The cold air burned my lungs, reminding me I was alive. That's when I noticed it, a strange, sweet smell cutting through the crisp mountain air. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite place, like wet wool and old cologne mixed with something metallic. Just altitude sickness playing tricks, I muttered to myself, voice sounding hollow in the silence. But as I adjusted my bindings, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on my back. I turned quickly, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing except shadows among the evergreens. Still, something seemed off about those shadows. Did that one just move? I shook my head and focused on the run ahead. This was why I'd come to Colorado after all, to escape demons, not find new ones. After what happened in Aspen last season, I needed this solo run to rebuild my confidence. The accident wasn't my fault, everyone said so. But they weren't there when Jake went over that cliff. The marks in the snow caught my attention again. They weren't quite footprints, but smooth, continuous depressions, as if someone had dragged something heavy across the surface. They started from the tree line and disappeared down the steepest section of the run. As I pushed off and began my descent, the first genuine smile in months crept across my face as the familiar rush of speed filled my veins. But it faded quickly when I spotted a figure standing motionless about 50 yards ahead, directly in my path. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette against the white, but something was very wrong with its proportions. Too tall, too thin. And it was just standing there, on a 70-degree slope. Not sliding, not falling. I carved hard to change direction, snow spraying as my edges bit deep. When I looked back, the figure was gone. The mountains suddenly felt much colder. My skis cut through the powder as I raced down the first section of the run, faster than was safe. I needed to put distance between myself and whatever I'd seen or thought I'd seen up there. The rational part of my brain insisted it was just another early riser, perhaps a patrol member checking the conditions before the lifts opened. But those marks weren't ski tracks, and nobody stands motionless on a 70-degree slope. Halfway down the first pitch, I pulled up to catch my breath. The sun now fully crested the eastern ridge, bathing the valley in golden light. Beautiful. Normal. I laughed nervously at my paranoia. You're losing it, Alex, I whispered to the mountainside. Alex, I froze. The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carried on a wind that wasn't blowing. It sounded like my name, but distorted, stretched out, like someone speaking through water. Hello, I called out, voice echoing across the empty slope. Is someone there? Only silence answered. Then I noticed the tracks again, those strange, smooth depressions, now appearing to my right, emerging from the trees where no one could have possibly skied from. I pushed off again, harder this time, wanting to reach the Midway Lodge where I'd arranged to meet Marcus for coffee after his shift. People. I needed to be around people. The familiar run looked different somehow. Trees I'd passed 100 times before seemed to lean inward as I passed. The shadows they cast stretched too long, moved too independently of their sources. And always, just at the edge of hearing, what sounded like whispers, multiple voices having a conversation I couldn't quite make out. I recognized a massive pine that marked the halfway point to the Midway Lodge. I'd nicknamed it the Sentinel during previous seasons. As I approached, I noticed something dark against its trunk. A splash of color on the bark about 6 feet up. I slowed, curiosity momentarily overriding fear. It looked like fabric, a piece of red material fluttering slightly. A scarf, maybe. I edged closer. Not a scarf. A strip of red fabric, identical to the jacket Jake had been wearing when he went over that cliff edge last season. It was pinned to the tree by what looked like an old-fashioned ice axe, the kind mountaineers used in the 1950s. My heart hammered against my ribs. This couldn't be real. Jake's body had been recovered. His equipment cataloged. I'd attended the funeral. The wind picked up suddenly, and with it came the voices again, clearer this time. Should have stopped. Your fault. Join us. I pushed away hard, skiing recklessly now, desperate to reach the Midway Lodge. The sun had risen fully, but the light seemed wrong, too yellow, casting everything in a jaundiced hue. The beautiful bluebird day I'd anticipated had transformed into something sickly. That's when I saw them for the first time. 3 figures spaced evenly across the slope ahead, standing perfectly still against the pitch of the hill. Like the first one I'd spotted, they were unnaturally tall and thin. And like the first one, they cast no shadows despite the angle of the sun. I cut hard left, aiming for a narrow path through the trees I knew would eventually connect with another run. As I entered the tree line, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded heavily before my face, momentarily blinding me. When it cleared, I saw boot prints in the snow ahead of me, old-fashioned, like from hobnailed climbing boots no one had used in decades. They came from nowhere and led deeper into the trees. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of something sliding across snow, not the carving of skis, but a smooth, continuous sound. Like bodies being dragged. Coming closer. The forest had never felt so dense, so alive with malice. Tree branches clawed at my jacket as I navigated the narrow path, each reaching twig seeming intentional in its attempt to snag me. The boot prints continued ahead, sometimes disappearing beneath fresh powder only to re-emerge yards later. This isn't real, I gasped, my words forming thick clouds in the unnaturally cold air. This isn't happening, but the sliding sounds behind me were undeniably real. A continuous, soft shushing that maintained its distance no matter how fast I pushed myself. I didn't dare look back. Some primal instinct warned that seeing what followed would break something in me I couldn't repair. The path through the trees should have brought me to Crosscut Trail in less than a minute. I'd taken this shortcut dozens of times. But 5 minutes had passed, and the trees showed no sign of thinning. Worse, I didn't recognize anything anymore. The pines loomed larger than they should, their trunks twisted into impossible shapes, branches hanging heavy with clumps of snow that resembled grasping hands. What if I never find my way out? The thought struck with paralyzing clarity. I stopped, chest heaving, and finally gathered the courage to look behind me. The path was empty. No sliding figures. Nothing but my own ski tracks disappearing around a bend. Relief washed over me for precisely 3 seconds. Then I realized the sliding sounds had stopped too. The silence that replaced them pressed against my ears like cotton wool. No wind. No distant sounds of the waking ski resort. Nothing, until a branch snapped somewhere to my left. I whipped my head toward the sound. Through gaps in the trees, I caught a flash of movement, vertical rather than horizontal. Something climbing. Another snap, this time to my right. Then behind me. They were surrounding me. My ski instructor training kicked in, adrenaline clearing my mind. I studied the terrain ahead, plotted the fastest route through the increasingly twisted trees. If I couldn't find crosscut trail, I'd forge my own path downhill. All mountains eventually led to their base. I pushed off hard, threading through gaps barely wider than my shoulders, ducking under branches and leaping over fallen logs. My skis, top-of-the-line powder skis, perfect for the open bowl but cumbersome in these conditions, caught edges and scraped bark. Each impact sent jolts through my legs. The forest grew darker despite the morning hour, as if the trees themselves were absorbing light. The temperatures continued to drop. The cold bit through my layers, reaching places it shouldn't be able to touch. My fingertips burned despite thick gloves. My face grew numb. Then I saw it, a clearing ahead. Sunlight cutting through the gloom. With renewed energy, I charged toward it, nearly crying with relief. I burst from the tree line onto Devil's Descent, the exact same run I'd started on. The same slope I'd fled from earlier. Somehow I'd circled back to the upper section. But it wasn't empty anymore. Across the bowl, figures dotted the pristine snow, dozens of them. Each standing perfectly still. Lights facing me. Each too tall, too thin, their proportions wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at them. And they were closer now. Close enough to see details I wished desperately to unsee. Their forms were human-shaped but blurred, as if composed of densely packed snow caught in a perpetual state of falling. Where faces should be, they had only smooth, featureless expanses interrupted by deep, dark hollows for eyes. Some wore fragments of what might have once been skiing or climbing gear, tattered pieces frozen into their forms. A glove here, a boot there, a splash of color that might have been a jacket. One figure stood apart from the rest, closer to me. Around its neck hung the remains of a red scarf, the exact shade of Jake's jacket. Your fault, the wind whispered, though no breeze stirred the powder. Should have seen the signs. Should have stopped him, my legs trembled, threatening to buckle. Because the worst part. The voice was Jake's. Jake, my voice came out as a broken whisper. The figure with the red scarf tilted its featureless head. The movement was wrong, jerky, like stop-motion animation missing frames. The dark hollows that served as eyes seemed to deepen as I watched. You should have stopped me, Alex. You saw the conditions. You knew the risks. I backed away, skis sliding awkwardly. It wasn't my fault. You went off trail. I called out to you, not loud enough. Not soon enough, the other figures began to move. Not by skiing, not by walking, but by a horrible sliding motion that left no tracks, as if they floated just above the snow's surface. They moved in perfect unison, closing the distance between us with methodical precision. I couldn't tear my eyes from the Jake thing. Details emerged the longer I looked, horrible, impossible details. Beneath the smooth snow face, I could make out the suggestion of features. Jake's features preserved in the moment of impact. The hollow sockets weren't empty after all, but filled with shadows that shifted and swirled like living things. Join us, Alex. We need a guide. Someone who knows these mountains. No, I jerked backward, finally breaking free of the paralysis. In one desperate motion, I spun and pushed off, aiming for the steepest part of Devil's Descent. If I couldn't outrun them through the trees, maybe I could outski them in the open. My edges bit into the hard pack beneath the powder. I crouched low, making myself aerodynamic, gathering speed that bordered on suicidal. The wind tore at my face. Trees blurred on either side. I'd never skied this fast, not even during competitive racing in college. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They weren't chasing. They stood in a perfect line across the slope, watching my flight. But even as relief began to build, I noticed something worse, more figures emerging from the tree line ahead. Forming a gauntlet I'd have to pass through. My mind raced through options. There was a cliff band to my left, normally out of bounds, but a 15-foot drop I could probably survive with my momentum. To the right, more trees, more darkness. Straight ahead, those waiting figures. Left it was. I carved hard, aiming for a section of the cliff where the drop seemed manageable. As I approached the edge, I crouched lower, preparing for the impact to come. Something caught my peripheral vision, movement in the snow beside me. The surface bulged upward as if something was pushing from below. The bulge raced alongside me, keeping perfect pace. Then a hand, a snow-white hand with blackened fingertips, punched through the surface, grasping at my ski. I screamed, jerking sideways, nearly losing my balance. The hand missed, fingers closing on empty air before disappearing back beneath the powder. The cliff edge approached. I steeled myself, knees bent, body tensed. At the last moment I launched, tucking into a tight ball as the ground disappeared beneath me. Time seemed to slow in midair. Below, I could see more figures waiting at the base of the cliff. Above, the sky had darkened to an impossible twilight despite the morning hour. Around me, the air itself seemed to thicken, as if reluctant to let me pass through it. I hit the landing hard, knees absorbing the impact, but the deep powder betrayed me. My right ski caught, twisting my leg. Pain exploded in my knee as I tumbled, snow filling my collar, my gloves, my helmet. When I finally stopped rolling, I lay still, gasping. My knee screamed in agony. Definitely torn something. Maybe worse. I struggled to sit up to assess the damage, to plan my next move. That's when I felt it. The snow beneath me. Shifting. Not from my movement, but from something else. Something moving underneath. All around me, the pristine slope began to bulge upward in dozens of places at once. Cold hands, so many hands, burst through the surface. The hands reached for me, pale, frozen fingers with blackened tips, some still wearing shreds of ancient climbing gloves. I screamed, thrashing backward despite the agony in my knee. My damaged leg dragged uselessly through the powder. One ski had detached in the fall. The other remained fixed to my left boot, now more hindrance than help. I clawed at the snow, desperate to put distance between myself and those grasping hands. My breath came in ragged gasps, forming clouds that hung in the unnaturally still air. The hands continued emerging, dozens of them, breaking through the surface like pale plants growing at impossible speed. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew the lifts wouldn't start running for another 15 minutes. Even if someone heard, who would reach me in time? Behind the hands came arms. Behind the arms came the distorted, snow-packed forms I'd seen before. They rose from the powder as if the mountain itself was giving birth to them, these lost souls of climbers and skiers who'd perished on Phantom Peak over decades. I recognized some of the tattered gear frozen into their forms, vintage pieces from the 40s, 50s, right up to modern equipment. My eyes locked onto a newer jacket fragment embedded in one of the rising figures, neon green, the exact shade of the search and rescue volunteer who disappeared during a blizzard 2 seasons ago. "Your fault," the wind voices repeated, growing louder. "You guide. You've watched us die. Season after season." "No," I protested, still dragging myself backward through the snow. "I didn't watch anyone die. Only Jake, and that wasn't my fault. You didn't stop him," the voices whispered in unison. "Just like you didn't stop the others." The figures continued rising from the snow, emerging fully now. Some were barely human-shaped, just vaguely bipedal columns of packed snow with those horrible dark hollows for eyes. Others had more definition, as if the mountain had better memories of their forms. The one with Jake's red scarf moved closer, its movement a jerky glide that left no tracks. "You know all the signs," it said, Jake's voice distorted as if speaking through frozen vocal cords. "The unstable snow pack. The temperature changes. The weak layers beneath. You read the avalanche reports every morning. You knew my back hit something solid, a tree trunk. I was cornered. My useless leg throbbed with each panicked heartbeat. The sky had darkened to a deep twilight gray, though my watch, when I dared glance at it, showed only 6:30 a.m. The figures formed a semicircle around me, closing in with that same eerie, floating movement. The Jake thing extended a hand toward me, fingers blackened with frostbite, palm cupped as if offering something. "Be our guide, Alex," it whispered. "Help us find our way home." "I can't," I sobbed, the cold seeping into my bones. "I don't know how. You know these mountains better than anyone." Another voice joined in, this one feminine, coming from a figure with long, ice-crusted hair visible beneath a vintage wool cap. "You grew up here. Third-generation ski patrol. You know where we fell. Where we're lost." With horrifying clarity, memories flooded back, not just of Jake's accident, but of countless stories I'd heard growing up. "The missing hikers from 67. The ski patrol member caught in an avalanche in 82. The 3 teenagers who'd gone out of bounds in 95 and never returned. Mountain tragedies whispered about in the lodge over hot chocolate and whiskey. Stories I'd dismissed as mountain lore, as warnings to stay on marked trails. The figures pressed closer. Cold radiated from them, not natural cold, but something deeper, something that reached for my soul itself. "I can't help you," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I don't know how." The Jake thing tilted its head again, that jerky, wrong movement. "Then we'll take what we need." Its hand shot forward, pale fingers plunging into my chest. Not through skin and bone, that would have been less terrible, but through something else. Something essential. I felt it rooting around inside me, searching, grasping. I screamed, but no sound emerged. The world began to fade at the edges, tunneling to a pinpoint of awareness centered on those probing fingers inside my chest. Alex. Alex, the voice came from far away, then closer. A real voice, human, alive, worried. Jesus Christ, Alex. Wake up, the snow phantoms paused, their hollow gazes shifting toward the sound. The pressure in my chest eased slightly. Someone's coming, I gasped, hope flaring. Help. I'm here, the figures began to withdraw, sinking back into the snow with uncanny speed. The Jake thing was last to go, its hollow eyes fixed on mine. We'll be waiting, it promised as it melted back into the mountain. When you're alone again. When no one's watching. We'll be waiting, Alex. I blinked, and suddenly the world was bright again. Morning sunlight streamed through the trees. The snow around me was disturbed only by my own thrashing. No handprints. No rising figures. Marcus appeared, sliding to a stop beside me, his face pale with concern. What the hell happened? I saw you from the service road. You were convulsing or something. I stared at him, then at the pristine slope around us. No evidence remained of what I'd experienced or hallucinated. Only my injured knee provided proof that something had happened. I fell, I managed. Hit my head, I think. My knees messed up. Marcus radioed for emergency evacuation, his worried eyes never leaving my face. You were talking to someone, Alex. Arguing. I heard you from 50 yards away. I shook my head, unwilling to explain. How could I tell him what I'd seen? What I'd felt? That hand inside me, searching for something vital. The ski patrol arrived within minutes, strapping me to a rescue sled. As they prepared to transport me down the mountain, I caught a glimpse of something in the tree line. A flash of red, there and gone in an instant. Wait, I called to the patrol members. Did you see that? In the trees, they exchanged glances, then looked where I pointed. Nothing there, Alex. You must have hit your head pretty hard. As they pulled me down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Of dark, hollow eyes tracking my descent. Of cold fingers still probing for something inside me. 3 days later, my MRI showed no head trauma, only a torn ACL. The doctors blamed altitude sickness, dehydration, and shock for my episode. I nodded and accepted their explanation, even as I knew the truth. I sold my equipment the following week. Took a job in Florida teaching surfing instead. I never returned to Silver Pine Resort. But sometimes, on cold nights when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear whispers. Familiar voices calling my name, stretching it out like someone speaking through water. And in my dreams I see them, those figures standing on impossible slopes, waiting. Always waiting. For me to return. For me to guide them home. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.